it's important to remember that a lot of people, the majority of people, did not grow up learning this kind of communication. They didn't see it modeled. They saw the opposite. It becomes more about either being right, I was right and you were wrong, or it becomes who can hurt the other person the most. That's not a problem-solving kind of language. That's all about me either being right or winning this fight or winning the war. Again, that's me versus you, not us versus the problem.
Gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Man to Man podcast here on the 360 Man. It's the podcast between two men, for all men, in the pursuit of wisdom in every degree of manhood. I'm Jesse Behringer, and today we are unpacking the 4 pillars of healthy communication to better help you articulate and express yourself throughout your day-to-day interactions by dealing with conflicts and finding resolution with those around you. Here to join me for the conversation today is Brandon Collins. He's a pastor, consultant, and fellow podcaster of the Ministry Architects organization and podcast. Brandon, thank you so much for being here today, man. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to join you. I've watched a little bit over the months of you getting this thing rolling and putting out your episodes, so excited to be on here once.
Yeah, terrific. Well, let's start right off the top with, I'm just very curious to know your thoughts that went into making this list, the 4 pillars of communication, how that came about. And I know it's something that you are very familiar with. It's something that you teach a lot of, that you've learned a lot over the years from. So why is this subject so important to learn? And what is it about the language of communication that people listening would find relevant and so essential for us to find familiar and become fluent with?
Yeah. So I think that to answer maybe the last question is why is this topic important? Why is it important to me? Why should it be important to everyone in my mind? I think because as humans, none of us are going to live alone. None of us are going to be an island. We're always going to have friendships. We're always going to have coworkers, even if we don't want to, right? There's always going to be people that we bump into, or the mailman, or the, whatever. If we get married, if we have a spouse, if we have siblings, parents, right? All of these things are relational. And as soon as you are engaging with another human being, which we all will do throughout our lives, the question is, not even a question, I would make it as a statement. Your communication and how you go about communicating is going to determine, to some extent, the health of that relationship. It's going to play a huge part in that. And it is going to impact your relationship, but how is it? Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? And so that's kind of what gets me excited about talking about it, teaching it. I should start off, to get to your other question, this isn't my stuff. This is stuff that I've sort of pieced together from a lot of people that I've learned from. Yeah. My parents, probably first among them, watching them and how they communicated, how they worked through tough situations with us, with each other, was massive for me. And then probably around high school, college, I ended up engaging with an organization of pastors and counselors. And so these were guys that were working through really tough issues with people. I mean, at their lowest points to some degree. And so this was a thing that they kind of put their heads together and said, all right, what are we seeing? How can we help guide people more effectively, whether it's marriage issues, parenting, all of that stuff. And so, this was like some of their top things. And I think, again, it's like you can do this poorly. And we've all seen, whether it's a church split or a best friend that, you have a fight and suddenly that's over, or a marriage that, breaks up. And it's like, man, how does that happen? How do you go from being so close to someone and so intimate and so connected to now we're enemies, now we're broken up, now we can never be together? And I think it's little things that stack up, that build up. And so that's where being really consistent and really aware of these principles is just so vital in every relationship that we have.
Well said. Yeah, it makes me realize how important it is to deconstruct and dissect the parts of communication and really pay attention to how we do it.
That's right.
And then learn how we can do it better.
Right.
All right, so let's get into it. We've got 4 rules. So we'll take some time here to identify each one, what they are, and then unpack the specifics of them individually. So, Brandon, tell me, what are the 4 rules of communication?
Yeah, so let me try to go through each one just briefly, and then I'm sure we'll dive in more in depth. So the 4 rules are: be honest, keep current, attack the problem, not the person, and act, don't react. So real quick, be honest, which is, hey, obviously we're not going to be lying and deceiving each other, but it also means you got to speak up to fight for the relationship. Keep current. That means you can't let things go go by the wayside. We'll talk more about that. Attack the problem, not the person. This fairly self-explanatory, but I think it's easy to say, harder to do. So we'll get into that one. And then act, don't react. And that I think is actually the hardest one, simplest to understand, but the hardest one to do because it's just so against our natural inclinations. So that's the overview in 30 seconds or less.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that first one there with be honest. Let's start with the basic premise of it. Can you clarify what specifically the goal here in this stage is for this rule and why it's the first one that we start with on this list?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a good way to frame that. So I think when I hear be honest, when most of us hear honesty, we think, well, as long as I'm not lying, right? So be truthful is what we think. And there is that, right? Absolutely deception, dishonesty, manipulation. Those are things that are going to poison our relationships over the long term. That is trading in the long-term health of the relationship for a short-term benefit to me. That's what that is. And so, but probably most of us, not that we never slip up, never struggle with that, but probably most of us would look at that and be like, yeah, that's a thing I don't want to be a part of my life. I don't want that to be a part of my relationship. The harder or more nuanced way of thinking about being honest is that it is not just a thing to not do, i.e. not lying, but it's also a thing we have to engage with proactively. So that in that sense, being honest means speaking up. It means making known the issues that are taking place in our relationship. And that, again, is where I think most people, even every one of us that would say, yeah, no, I don't want to be a liar. I don't think I was a liar.
Yeah.
But then are you speaking up? Are you going the extra distance when it's not easy to share something? Because that's, at the end of the day, I wonder if this mostly comes down to fear. Fear of man, right? Fear of how are they going to respond? What if they, yell at me? What if they don't like me after I say this? And so being honest says, no matter how afraid I am, no matter how hard this is going to be, I'm going to speak up for the good of this relationship.
Yeah. You mentioned in your 4 points here that problems can't be solved unless they are expressed. So if you don't express it, we can't address it.
Yeah.
I love that little nugget there.
Yeah.
What are some ways that we want to avoid expressing our thoughts and then embrace expressing our thoughts?
So I think when some people think, oh, I'm supposed to speak up. I'm supposed to share about all my feelings. Like it's like it feels like it gives them a free pass to sort of use truth as a weapon, to use honesty as a way to get something off their chest. Or, man, I can't believe you said that to me. That was awful. And now it becomes this sort of way of weaponizing the truth. And in Scripture, in the Bible, we see no, you speak the truth in love.
Yeah.
And so the flip side of that is, well, I'm not here for me. I'm not here to get something off my chest. I'm not here to just say my piece. I'm here for you. I'm here to build you up and to build up our relationship because I care more about the relationship than I do about me and what makes me feel better. So in that sense, it's more about what's the best thing that you need to hear and what's the best thing for our relationship. Because this is what I've noticed, even in the midst of the fear or the challenge of a relationship, the very best thing most of the time is for me to speak up and share what's going on. Yeah. And that actually 99% of the time, it does not hurt the relationship. It helps the relationship. Yeah. It takes it to a new level of connection, a new level of trust. Man, one of the best ways to build trust is to actually be honest in a hard conversation. To say, hey, did you notice that when you speak like this, here's how it makes me feel, and I wonder if other people feel that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how you build trust. That's how you build intimacy. And so when I think about being honest, to me, it's like, wow, this is a moment where I have the opportunity to fight for the good of this relationship and to fight for the good of this person. But will I? Will I speak up in that? And so that when you talk about what should it not sound like, what should it sound like, the first one is all about me. The second one is all about, okay, how can I build this person up? How can I build our relationship up?
Wow. What a great word there. And that is so eye-opening to, hey, it's not about me, because if I had it my way, I would express, hey, you, what did you do? And I think vocabulary is such an important part of that, which we'll get into in a little bit here. But the perspective, the mindset of, hey, this person, this other person in this friendship, relationship, or just in communication, just passing by with somebody, how do I kind of communicate what I'm feeling in a way that this person can understand? Sort of put yourself in their shoes, kind of way, right?
That's right. How they can understand it and how they can grow through it.
Yeah,
we all benefit from getting someone's perspective about our life, especially on the challenging issues. It's so hard to see our own weaknesses. That's why we use mirrors in real life, right? You wake up, you're like, my hair's all crazy, I need a mirror. But in real life, that's our friends, that's our social circle, right? To share those things with us. And so I just think that and you asked earlier, why is that the first one? Because this is the raw material. This is where it begins. If I'm not willing to be honest and actually speak up about things, there's nothing else to be done. Right? There's nothing else. There's no other guidelines. There's nothing that way. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is that maybe someone's like, man, our relationship's so great, we never have any problems. And I'm like, maybe now, but there's gonna come a problem, and or vice versa. Sometimes people think, man, I wish I was more godly. I wish this person was more godly, then we wouldn't have problems. And the thing that I think is true is that the godly relationship or the strong relationship is not about not having problems. It's about engaging those problems and solving them in a way that is honoring to God and mutually beneficial for the health of the person in the relationship.
Right. Yeah. Something I noticed that you put in your notes here was the truth and love aspect of it, and sort of the way that Jesus would do that, and he would demonstrate the truth towards someone living in sin and that was at fault here, but with the presence of love.
Yeah.
And that both were very key and important. And is that an important part for the honesty part as well?
Absolutely. Because if you're not being honest, if you're holding back truth, that is unloving, fundamentally. Yeah. You are allowing that person to remain ignorant of truth that they need in their life in order to grow. Yeah. So that's unloving. So that's the truth part. But then the love part is the way in which you go about it. It's like, hey, I'm here as your friend. This might hurt when I share this with you. In fact, I've often even sometimes quoted or referenced the proverb that talks about I'm not going to be able to quote it, but the wounds of a friend are faithful, but the kisses of an enemy. It talks about contrasting that. And I say, hey, listen, I'm here. This is going to feel like a wound. This is going to feel painful, but know that I'm here as your friend, and I have some hard things to say because I love you and I care about you and I care about our relationship. And so there's a vibe there of I'm here in love. I'm not here to hurt you. It is going to hurt because it's a hard thing to say, but I'm mostly here in love as your brother, so.
Great. Okay, so that is all some very applicable place to start from, I think, when we're starting the 4 rules of communication. So be honest. I love that.
Yep.
Now, your second point is to be current.
Yep.
This actually took me a second to understand and to process with this point, because so let me know if I'm getting off your point here of what this is. But from what I understand, this rule essentially seems like the jumping off point to get the ball rolling towards addressing the problems in maybe a situation of conflict, or at least during this stage, that might be a part of it.
Yeah. I think you're hitting on it. The idea, if be honest is the what and the how, right? Speak the truth in love. We just talked about that. If that's the what and the how, keep current is the when. I'm going to tell you the truth next year. You know what I mean? That's not helpful. Like, in fact, a friend of mine told me the story where he brought something up with his wife, and it was early in their marriage, so he's sort of still learning, and he's like, over the past 6 months or so, I've really started to feel this way, and she got real angry with him because she's like, 6 months? You waited 6 months to tell me this? And so his point was like, yes, I'm going to speak up, I'm going to be honest with you, but do it in a timely fashion. Right. And there's several reasons on that I want to mention, just a couple of them. So first is, if we're not careful, there's this passage in Ephesians that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger, okay? Yeah. So I want to talk about anger here in a minute, but before we get there, so don't let the sun go down implies a certain amount of timeliness, right?
Urgency.
Yes, urgency, good word. So, but also when you think about why urgent, why is it time sensitive, right? I think there's 2 reasons. One is the longer I wait, the more that issue between us, that thing that I'm feeling, has a chance to seep into how I think about you. It's going to influence the way I interact with you. Yeah. I'm wearing glasses. It's like a lens through which we are seeing that relationship. Right. And so if you wait 6, 12 months, or even weeks, that's going to have repercussions for that relationship. So that's one. But even more practically and simply, I don't know if you've ever tried to circle back to a tough conversation and like deal with something like 2-3 weeks later.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes because you don't even remember.
Right.
Wait, what did I say?
The process of thinking of what actually went wrong, or how it was hurt there.
Exactly. When you said this, if it's like an hour ago, I can say, man, when you used this word and then you looked at me in that way, that I just felt this.
Yeah.
A week later, I'm not going to remember the look on your face or the words you used or how it made me feel. And so there's a sense where, do not let the sun go down. When the sun's up, you're outside doing work. You're farming. That's the productive time. So when I think about don't let the sun go down, it's like engage this opportunity because that's really what it is, right? It's an opportunity to build this relationship. Engage that before the moment, the opportunity has passed you by. So that's where the urgency, the timeliness sort of comes into play with being keeping current.
Sure. Okay. So then the addressing part of it is along the lines of when it's being addressed. That's
right.
when it's coming into play
That's
here,
right.
and the urgency of that.
Right.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on someone who might say, well, if I let it wait, maybe it won't bother me anymore. What is the response there? Could that be a possibility that maybe it wasn't as big of a deal if that does happen?
Yeah.
Or when does that come into play, and what's the difference of letting that play out?
Absolutely. So I think there's a passage that says love covers a multitude of sins. And even if you're not a Bible person, maybe you're still figuring out, what you think about Jesus or the Bible, like that phrase just makes so much sense. Like if I always am going to be speaking up whenever anybody like looks at me funny and like, or bumps into me a little bit, like we're always going to be addressing problems.
Right.
So there's a sense where yes, love can cover a multitude of sins. And it's a fair question, I think, to ask yourself, is this a thing that I'm going to let love cover? Right. But we can get that question wrong, number one.
Yeah.
So maybe it's, I'm going to let love cover it. And then it's a day later, you're like, man, I just can't, you wake up thinking about it or, 2 days later, okay, now it's like, okay, you need to start addressing it. And you're not always going to be perfect. There's going to be times where I'm going to think, yeah, I'm going to let that one go. And then a week goes by and I can't get it off my mind. And I probably need to go back and address it. Have I missed some of the opportunity? I absolutely have.
Right.
But it's not on purpose. It wasn't because I was being lazy or being afraid to bring it up. It's because I was trying to let love cover it. So I think it really comes down to what are you after in that? Are you saying, you know what, Lord, show me, is this the thing that I need to address, or can I just let this one go?
Great. So these next two are definitely my favorite of the two, and I think they're very instantly applicable, instantly recognizable for someone who hears them. And the third one you have is attack the problem, not the person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do love this point. I feel like this rule, easy to identify, but I would say very difficult to practice, to put into practice.
Sure.
I think that might be because we have trouble separating the two from each other.
Very well said.
The person and the problem.
Yes.
And clarifying the language that we use to do this, as well as which one is which.
Let me say something real quick about that. In fact, I think you said that really well. It's very difficult, especially emotionally, when we're thinking and feeling big things, to stop and be logical. And so there's a phrase that I have been using recently. It's a thing that I communicate, especially with my wife Megan. But it's a self-talk thing, and it's for her to hear. I'll say this: I'm not frustrated with you. I'm frustrated with the situation. Ooh. And it's like, both, again, I want her to know that, but I'm like, nope, this is not a her thing. This is just a situation. This is a hard situation. It doesn't have to be anyone's fault, right? It's just a problem. All relationships have issues to work through.
Kind of a mantra that you're reminding yourself to sort of just, hey, do it. Just remember, this isn't against you. This is against the problem. Let's solve it together.
Exactly right. In fact, another phrase I've heard people use is, it's not me versus you. It's you and me versus this problem, right? We're together attacking this problem. We're going into battle together, even though it only came up because of our relationship. When we see each other on the same side, that can be very helpful.
Absolutely. So I guess the question is, how do we do this? How can you walk me through each of them separately? The problem and then the person. How do I distinguish between each of them? And then what exactly does it look like to initiate that? Okay.
So when it comes to attacking the person, this is what I think most of us hear most often. It sounds like a fight. It sounds like an argument. Lots of name calling. It becomes more about either being right. I was right and you were wrong. Or it becomes who can hurt the other person the most. I think is maybe to some people that sounds wow, it's that bad. Yeah, it can be that bad. Where it's like, man, no, I all I care about is that you hurt me, and now I'm going to hurt you.
Right.
So name calling or attacking someone's character, you're this kind of person. I can't believe you would, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That's not a problem-solving kind of language. That's all about me either being right or winning this fight or winning the war. Again, that's me versus you, not us versus the problem.
Yeah.
So when it comes to attacking the person, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like I'm going to try to hurt you. I'm going to try to be right. I'm going to come out on top, making you feel bad, those kinds of things. So if you flip that around, okay, now if it's not about me versus you, but us versus the problem. Okay, well, it's going to be solutions. Okay, what actually happened? Let's get clear. You said this. What did you mean by that?
Yeah.
You looked at me this way, or the tone of your voice made me think this. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Or so it's like, I said this because I felt like that. So a lot of practical language, clarifying what happened and why it happened the way that it did. That is what it looks like to try to solve the problem, get to the root of the issue. And there still might be when you dig down those layers, there still might be someone at fault, and that's okay, right? And we can solve that problem. We can come to a solution if we're both here for the relationship. But at the end of the day, you're there to say, okay, let's clarify what happened. Let's figure out what's the root of the issue, and then how can we, solve this issue moving forward.
Sure, and I assume it's very different depending on the type of relationship that it is.
Yeah.
In a marriage, maybe it involves something upfront of, hey, let's set some time aside to do this. But then if it's a work relationship type deal, where's the difference there? And then do I initiate, do I say something up front to this person that, hey, I think we need to spend some time with some conflict resolution? Is there an upfront thing or do I just go right into it?
Okay, so if it's a more serious conversation, that's where I probably would have some preamble up front.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned earlier about even referencing, hey, I have some tough things to talk about with you, but just know that I'm here as your friend. That's the kind of like, this is a big deal moment. But I think there's a lot of other moments where there's just kind of the day in, day out vanilla stuff of life. And in those, I don't think there's necessarily, you need a lot of preamble. Absolutely the timing we talked about before, saying it in love, having good timing. There's a passage in Proverbs that talks about a word fitly spoken is like honey. It's like sweet. And I always think about the opposite. So if you say it at the wrong time, saying the right thing at the wrong time cannot taste as good.
Definitely.
So a lot of it is good timing and those kinds of things. The other big piece about this that I think is really critical is to use questions. Questions are probably the most effective tool that you can have in your communication tool belt, especially when it comes to conflicts. So the phrase that I wrote down and have always remembered that I learned from this group of pastors and counselors is, questions build bridges, accusations build walls.
Wow.
So when I'm accusation, right? So if there's an issue, say you didn't, we'll go back to the example of the phone call. You never got back to me.
Yeah.
Hey man, why didn't you didn't call me back? You ignored me. You ignored me is an accusation.
Yes.
Hey, did you get my call the other day? That's a question.
Okay.
Hey, did you see the message I left you? Hey man, what's going on? How are things? Are you super busy? You hear how those questions can lead toward the same conversation in a way that is building a bridge. It's a connection. When someone comes at me with an accusation, instantly I have walls up. Instantly I'm going into self-defense mode, right? But when someone asks a question, it's like, okay, let's see what actually happened. There's a sense of humility where it allows that I could be wrong. I might not have the facts right. Maybe I literally called the wrong number and, sent the email to the wrong email or whatever. It went to the spam. And so it's not your fault. And so now I look like a jerk if I come in with accusations. You lazy, how could you not? You didn't respond to my email. Well, I never got the email. Now I'm the one, who is hurting you instead of coming in with a question of, hey, did you get my email the other day? Oh, you did. Okay. You haven't gotten back to me. Is everything okay? You're checking in on that. So there's a humility there. There's a loving there, assuming the best about someone. I love that passage in 1 Corinthians 13 that you always hear at weddings, right? Love is patient, love is kind. Exactly. Yep. One of those that I love, especially on this topic, is that love believes all things and hopes all things. And so I think it's important for us, if we're gonna communicate well, is to become skilled in believing the best about people. So if I send you an email and you never get back to me, okay, I have two options. I can go, that lazy jerk doesn't care about me, doesn't think this thing is important enough to to engage with. Or I can go, maybe it went to spam. Maybe there's some stuff going on in his life. Maybe he changed his email. And I can creatively come up with solutions that are the best way of thinking. And then I can choose to believe those things until I'm proven otherwise.
Right, sure. So sort of an innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly.
Like let's approach this to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
And until I see something that's either them initiating hostility, and then we can go and deal with that as it comes, but assume that this person hasn't wronged you.
Yes.
And that, busyness or whatever is the answer, and that approach them with a question.
That's right. Yeah. And it sounds so simple when we're talking about it.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it's way more natural to think, oh, I know exactly what happened. They thought this and that. And then they wanted to, insult me in this way. And they don't think I'm important. Like, well, pause for a minute. And that's where it's a skill to literally think creatively. Like, okay, could I invent? It's like almost like you're like a novelist. Like, can I invent a scenario that is the best possible scenario for them? And then I'm going to choose to believe that and engage with that person that's as if that's true until, like you said, I come in with a question, clarify what happened, and then let's try to solve that problem together.
Yeah. I see those very differently through the lens of your phone and in person. Talk about the differences there and how maybe in person, we react. Well, I'd say you react maybe a little quicker too on your phone, but the difference is there that when we're in person, we maybe have a little more respect, a little less hostility.
Absolutely.
So how do we approach that maybe when we're on our phone versus in person?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would just say you should never be dealing with a hard conversation in text.
Okay,
text
thank you for
message,
saying that.
email. No,
please, thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Never should that happen. Unless it's just the smallest, tiniest detail. And even then, I've seen those tiny little things like, hey, how come the report is a day late? And instantly that person's hearing you shouting at them, right? You can't hear tone of voice, all that. Phone is way better, but even better, obviously, like you said, is face-to-face.
Yeah.
And I think then it really comes down to what's in your heart. What is in your heart is going to come out in the tone of your voice, in the words that you choose to say. I don't think you can really fake those things most of the time. Most people pick up on that. In fact, one of my friends, we talked about this, and he's like, well, asking questions can be passive aggressive. And I was like, wow, that's a really good point. Like you could say to someone, hey, so how's your email been? And kind of be like trying to poke at them, but what is in your heart? You know what I mean? What am I really believing about this person? And so I think that comes out more. You can't do that in text. You can't, a little bit on the phone, but it really comes out more in person, and making sure that my heart is in the right place is massively, massively important. So, and I just want to mention this too, that this skill of asking questions, it is a skill. It is a thing you get better at. It is not always easy to come up with a good way of approaching something that doesn't assume, that doesn't cause the walls to go up. One quick example on this, one of my close friends in college, I just was seeing some really unhealthy habits in their life. And I was like, man, I really need to approach them about this. And I was like, man, how can I do this without being like this area of your life, this area of your life, this area of your life? How can I do this without like pointing the finger? And I thought about it. I must have spent hours trying to think of the right question. And finally I came up with, God gave me this question of, hey, if you met the person of your dreams tomorrow and you were like, that's the person, I want to marry that person. Like, or maybe you don't know you want to marry them, but you're like, I'm going, like, this is going to get serious real fast. That's right. Like I said, if you met that person tomorrow, based on where your life is right now, would you feel comfortable and confident engaging that? And I just paused and I watched them stop and think, and they named all the things that I would have brought up, right? They knew, but the question really allowed them to engage the truth in a way that it wouldn't have helped. It wouldn't have happened if I came in pointing fingers and all of that. One other thing I wanted to mention about this point of attacking the problem, not the person, is a warning, I think, for people, because all of these principles, all of these pillars are important. But the warning I wanted to mention here is about identity. Identity is a critical, like, core foundational thing of who we are. How we live, how we behave, all of that is very connected to how we think about ourselves. The kind of person that we are, that we think we are, determines to a large extent how we live, how we behave. So then, okay, coming back to communication, right? If we've got these kind of core relationships, parents to kids, spouses, close friends that we really respect, even an employer-employee relationship, when you attack someone in the midst of that kind of relationship and you are attacking their identity, you're telling them you're this kind of person, you're a failure. The language that we start using, what we're doing is we are attacking their identity and we're attaching the problem that we're facing to that person's identity. And that can become just a really intense poison that lasts with them for years and years and years. So again, these principles are absolutely important. All of them are, but the warning on this one, I just think is so important to just watch and listen to how we're talking to people that respect us, and never, ever, ever to be attacking them directly and not attacking their identity.
Yeah, that's a great point to keep in mind going into these conversations, I feel like, because that is easily, I think, a tactic we subconsciously might have, or just an agenda that sort of comes out because we get so defensive or we are so hurt that just suddenly comes out.
That's right.
And maybe even potentially going back to the first point about being honest, maybe it's stuff that you've swept under the rug before, and now it's coming back up again because you haven't confronted those situations.
Yes, the more you wait, the more stuff piles up, and now your response at the end of 6 months or 12 months of holding it all in is going to be way out of proportion to the small thing that happened. And to your other point, probably whatever my response is, probably I just want you to hurt just a little bit. I just want you to know and feel. I'm probably not trying to really assassinate your identity and character, but that's what can happen if we're not careful with that stuff.
So okay, we've got one last point here, one last rule for communication and sort of conflict resolution, and that is to act, don't react. And again, I love this point so much because you instantly acknowledge sort of the conviction of, oh man, yeah, I know what you're talking about. For me personally, I see that there's such relatability and immediate understanding when I hear this of how I need to adjust my communication skills, especially during something like conflict resolution. So I'm pretty sure that most of us understand what you're implying here with, act, don't react. But can you just clarify for us what this looks like in practice, specifically first the don't react part of it?
Yeah. So let me say this first about the principle in general. When you think about a reaction, I always frame it like a chemical reaction. There's formulas and math. If I mix this much of this chemical with this much of that chemical, here's exactly what's going to happen. Down to the last gram, I know I'm going to end up with 10 grams of this and 5 grams of that. It's all done. It's all a foregone conclusion because there's no choice involved. So when you talk about acting and not reacting, we're reintroducing choice. We're reintroducing intentionality into that interaction. So reaction would be, okay, if you say something that hurts me, my initial reaction, the way that my natural instincts are going to be, is to try to hit you back in the same way. When you cause me pain, like we were talking about before, I want to hurt you in the same way that you hurt me. I want to get defensive. That is the reaction. That is the natural way that things happen, right? But we can choose to not behave that way. We're not two chemicals coming together, right? And so we can make a choice to be intentional about how we respond to someone, no matter what they're doing in a certain situation. So, it can be basically saying, I'm going to refuse to allow you to dictate my behavior. Whatever you say to me, however, even if that person is really offending you on purpose, trying to hurt you, you don't have to respond in kind.
Right.
And so that's really the heart of the principle of act, don't react.
Sure.
It's saying, hey, no matter how you're making me feel, no matter what emotions I'm feeling right now, I come in intentionally ready to choose to respond in a certain way, in a way that is loving, in a way that is kind, all those things we talked about before.
Right. Yeah. Which, to not downplay it at all, could be sometimes impossible for some people to try and not, especially if someone is coming at you in a very hostile way, or maybe you're perceiving it that's the way they're coming at you. Maybe you're on your phone and that's, again, the way it's being perceived is like that. But I think something key to remember there that you brought up earlier is that, we're attacking the situation, right? What's going on here. And that plays a part in the action and not the reaction.
Yeah. And I think another point to add to what you're saying is that we're not talking about allowing yourself to be stepped on and abused and just taking the beating.
Of course.
But it's more about, I'm not going to throw punches back at you.
Yeah.
Right? That's a different thing. There's healthy boundaries where, someone's cussing you out, yelling at you, maybe a little bit of making you scared to be in what we're not talking about, and what scriptures don't want us to do is to just stand there and become this punching bag for this person. That's not healthy.
Right.
But when it is a, back and forth, it's an intense conversation, someone says something and it's just just hits me or they're insulting me, I don't have to take that and do it back to them, especially when it's a close relationship, spouse, parent, child, we don't have to reciprocate the negative things. Sometimes the most loving thing is to draw a boundary and say, hey, the way you're talking to me right now, that's not cool. But that's me saying that is not a reaction. It's not me, well, I can't believe, yelling and all that. It's saying, hey, listen, that's not okay. I'm drawing a hard boundary here. We can revisit this another time when you're ready to engage me in a healthy way.
It sounds like the key portion there that you're trying to serve is that we want to prevent escalation in a situation.
Right.
So if someone's very hostile, and then we can act with their hostility by not escalating it with more hostility.
That's right.
And then keeping the peace, at least on my side.
Right.
And then if we need to draw a boundary, we can do that.
Yeah.
But we're not going to react, because then you do maybe cross the line you can't come back from in that situation.
That's right. And there's a whole group of people, I don't want to say it's a group, but there's a lot of the population in general. They feel that it feels like they have to defend their honor or their respect, or else they're going to be disrespected. I see it a lot in sports when a guy gets a hard hit or a hard foul or whatever, and it's like all their teammates feel like they have to come like at them, and it's like that's just all that is pride. All that is like, well, it's all about me and how people think about me. But to react, that's reaction. To act is to say, listen, maybe I have to draw a hard boundary, but I'm going to do it with respect. I'm going to do it with kindness. And again, to your point about escalation, not only are we not escalating, but often choosing to act. One person who chooses to act can also often diffuse the situation. Someone gets too in the moment. It's like, hey, that's not cool what you just said there.
Yeah.
Like that hurt. And it's like, listen, I'm sorry, I didn't quite mean. That can happen. I've seen that where an intense moment, their emotions get the better of them, and they say something in the moment, and you're like, hey, that's not cool. I'm not going to respond to, I'm not going to respond in kind, but I want you to know that, and now you're addressing that, and it can diffuse the situation and actually allow you to still engage.
Sure. Those are great. Can you give me a few more of those sort of pocket lines to use maybe as a way to act against someone's, you mentioned like putting on the actions versus the reactions. Sure. What are a couple of lines that maybe are blanket statements, blanket generalizations that I might be able to use in my arsenal to keep in mind of like, okay, in this scenario, I might be able to tailor this response in a different way.
Yeah.
But what is some language that we should be looking towards for these types of situations to act and not react?
Yeah. I think that there's two layers. I'll try to give you some practical things like you're talking about, but I also want to circle back in a minute to the attitude behind it, because I think that really dictates a lot of what is going to come out of my mouth, right?
Yeah.
So first I wanted to mention the whole thing about boundaries. Many people that I've known, they think boundaries are unloving. They think boundaries are being mean, to say, hey, I will not allow someone to talk to me the way that you just did. Hey, that's not cool. That's not okay. Listen, I appreciate you. I love you, but we're going to engage this a different time if you can't engage in a respectful way. That's a great one. Hey, why did you say that? Why do you feel like you have to, so there's questions that can come into it. A lot of it comes back to, we talked about being solution oriented earlier and asking questions and narrowing into, what are you feeling right now? Here's how you're making me feel about this. What are you feeling right now that you feel like you have to come at me this way? So there's some practical things that way. But the thing I wanted to mention is, when our attitude, I talked before about people who feel like they have to defend their honor. That's just an attitude of pride. That's an attitude that says how I feel about myself and how other people see me is the most important thing. But instead, if we come, and this is where the gospel comes in, this is where when we realize what kind of a person, when I realize what kind of person I really am, and that Jesus died on the cross for me, for that kind of person. When I hated him, when I was in rebellion, that's when he loved me. That's when he came and died for me. If I walk into a hard conversation in that moment where I'm not all ready to be self-defending or whatever, but just I'm just a broken person that I always think of that passage in Matthew 18, where he talks about the two servants. One servant owed tons of money, a ridiculous amount of money to his Lord, and he gets his debt forgiven. And then he goes out of that room and he sees another servant who owes him, it's a lot, but it's not a huge amount. It's way less than he owed. And he's like, how dare you? You owe me. He grabs him by the neck. And Jesus says that man was unmerciful. It's like when we realize how much we've been forgiven, when we realize how broken we are, how forgiven we are, how loved we are, that equips us to be able to come into that moment, even when someone is hurting us. It's still going to hurt. Yeah. My heart is still going to be broken, but it's not going to be a self-defense. It's not going to be I'm ready to come at you. So I think that the attitude really is the most important thing, even if you don't have just the right words to say, man, I don't know how to handle this, but to have a heart for that person, I think is really the heart of the matter.
Oh, what a great word. The attitude part specifically of, hey, even when you just said, I don't know how to respond to this. This is how I feel. And I just want to express it however way I can here. And, but those I think are great is to keep in mind those, I think a mindset points of how you go into those conversations and do these, because you're all going on a case-by-case basis.
That's right.
And maybe the way that the person hurt you is different and that kind of thing. But these all remain the same, these 4 points, because of how we have our attitude and how we communicate those things.
To your point about case-by-case and navigating that with people, it's important to remember that a lot of people, the majority of people, did not grow up learning this kind of communication. They didn't see it modeled. They saw the opposite. There are families where the only way they know how to solve problems is by cussing and yelling and hurting each other. Oh, that's how. No, I wasn't. I was just solving this problem. I'm just having a conversation. Yeah. And if especially if it's a spouse, or especially if it's a sibling or a friend, you might have to coach them a little bit and say, hey, how come you just said that? Like, what do you really feel that way about me? Well, no, I just whatever. Okay, but do you hear the words? What do you expect me to interpret those words when you just said that thing that really hurt me? And it might have to be you helping them understand and see the way their words are impacting you. That is a massive thing, to not forget that these are skills and that some people don't have the skills. And so you got to walk with them a little bit. So absolutely having that attitude is the only way you can be equipped to do that, rather than, when I'm hurt, I'm going to hurt you back.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you so much. Those are excellent tools, I think, for us all to use, both just in day-to-day conversations, communication, conflict resolution, both in people we do know and that we don't know. But one last little bonus question I want to ask you, maybe you could leave us with, is hard conversations. We mentioned a little bit of this earlier, where, a lot of us have dealt with hard conversations and will continue to deal with hard conversations, whether you're in a point of leadership or not. Can you tell us the approach that we should have here? Maybe a couple of bullet points or extra things to keep in mind when having hard conversations with somebody, both in the preparation and the handling of those conversations.
Absolutely. Let me give you a few questions. These are helpful, prep. If you think about like a pre-flight checklist, like, okay, is the flaps and the gears, I don't know, I'm not a pilot, but you get the idea, right? It's like the checklist.
Right.
So let me give you kind of a pre-flight checklist before you're engaging with a hard, or I call it a sticky conversation, that you're like, I don't know where this is going to go.
Yeah.
So first is, do I have the facts right? And the short way to do that is always start with a question. But also, if there's ways to do research on the front end, do some homework. If it was an email thing, go research. Wait, what exactly did I say? When was that? What exactly did they say? So do some homework. Do I have the facts right? Come in with a humble question to start with. The second one is, we talked about it. Should love cover it? Is this really a big enough deal for me to bring this up? Or is it about just me? Is it a preference thing that I can let go? Or is it about their health? Are they at risk? Is our relationship at risk? Is there an opportunity for us to gain here by engaging this issue? Timing, is my timing right? Is another one. We've touched on it, but again, it's a good checklist to ask. What are they walking through? What am I walking through? Am I emotionally ready? Am I tired? Am I sleepy? Am I ready to go? Right. Is this the right moment to have this conversation? That's a great one to ask. Is my attitude right? Is another great self-evaluation question. And I know we spent some time here, so I won't dig in, but again, it's like, am I right? Am I want to being right? Or am I after what's best for them? What's best for the situation? Are my words loving? And that takes some preparation. What's the most kind way, still speaking the truth, but in love, to address this issue? Are my words right? Have I thought through the right way of saying it? And then have I asked for help? That's a huge one that a lot of people don't think about. But if you're being intentional, if you really care about that person, and this might be a sticky situation, ask for help. Pray about it. Ask for help from God. Ask for help from other people in your life that you respect that, hey, here's what I'm trying to address this issue. How does this sound to you? Sometimes when I'm writing an email that's a tough email, I'll have someone else read it.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, does this come across funny? And it's the same idea of, hey, listen to these words, listen to this question. Am I off base here? How does this sound to you? Get some insight from people. And I think that's a great checklist to use before you walk into a tough conversation.
That is terrific, Brandon. Thank you so much. That there's a lot to unpack here, I think, especially as men who can have a point of pride when it comes to, like you said, honor or disrespect for things that have come to us. And I could see the point of view. I can hear the voice of someone saying, this seems a little over the top. We're overanalyzing here. Let's just get into it and let's just see what happens. But what does end up happening there is that some words could get said. If we go in improvisation planning with no plan, it's very easy to let things escalate.
Right.
And to know where to have your default be during these conversations, I think is what I'm getting out of this is like, hey, where's my default when I don't know where to go in a situation I've never been before with uncharted territory.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you said it a couple of times that it is case by case. So that 6-point checklist, you don't need to do that every single conversation, right? But it's like, hey, if this is a bigger deal, let's take the time that it brings. And I wanted to just mention this too, specifically as men. It can be tempting for us to say, well, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to be the strong, silent type. And we think of communication as, well, that's maybe a female thing, or maybe that's a thing I do in counseling or therapy. And it's like, well, no.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that I have found that is helpful. And we've hit on this briefly, but I want to just mention it here at the end. Every tough conversation is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to sharpen myself, opportunity to sharpen that person, and opportunity to build that relationship. And in any other arena, when we see an opportunity, we want to take advantage of it. When it's a job opportunity, when it's a financial opportunity, when whatever the opportunity is, we're like, and the bigger the opportunity, the more serious we're going to take it. So when there's a deep, hard conversation to tackle, that's a big opportunity. And so I'm going to take more time. I'm going to be more intentional about doing it with excellence, doing it with kindness, doing it with love to, again, sharpen myself, sharpen that person, sharpen the relationship. It is not a thing. It is not a hospital, this passive thing of like, oh, I'm just trying to figure this out. Let's all be soft and share our feelings. No. It's more like going to war for their sake, for my sake, for the relationship's sake.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for being here, for coming in, sharing your insight, and equipping us with the tools to confront conflict and give us what I think is a fantastic blueprint to communicate and express our thoughts with everybody that we come across with in interactions on a day-to-day basis.
My pleasure. It's always fun talking about it. It's something that I always need to be sharpened in myself. So I love just talking with people about it and sharing about it. So thank you for the opportunity.